Hi, this is Mr. Milton, and we've been talking about child labor laws in Great Britain. I do apologize for my voice. Um, the quote, George Danton, I'm going to change it up a little bit. He says, well, history is not made of rose water. When we look back at the past, there's obviously going to be some things that we don't agree with, and child labor is probably one of them. But you are able to read different sides of the belief on whether or not there should be regulation. Sometimes they're playing around with very similar facts, which is very interesting. I personally kind of enjoyed reading the two doctors and comparing them. And Edward Baines, even though you might not agree with what he says, I think he has a very interesting argument. For my honor students, you probably noticed that it echoed Charles Knight, which is interesting. We're going to be looking at the labor laws that were eventually passed in Britain, and it's going to take them a number of years to pass these. So let's journey into this, won't you? We've talked about this. The reform legislation took place really between 1800 and 1850, and we're going to be looking at them. So the Factory Act of 1819 is passed, and it says no child under the age of 9 may work. In between the ages of 9 and 16, you could only work 12 hours a day. This was obviously overlooked because you met someone who got his job in 1824. That was William Cooper. So we know that this was overlooked. Why do you think this law might have been overlooked? Go ahead, take a guess. Write it down, see if you're right. Actually do it. I don't know if you did it, but we're going to move on, and I'm going to congratulate you for doing it. So in 1833, we're going to see another Factory Act, because obviously that one's not going to work. And this one, it reduces the age a little bit. It says, no one under the age of 9 may work. And between the age of 9 and 13, they can only work 8 hours a day with an hour lunch, and they get 2 hours of education. You can imagine how great it would be for after an 8-hour shift getting 2 hours of education. Between the ages of 14 and 18, you can only work 12 hours a day, but you still got the hour lunch, and there was routine government inspections. So that's going to be a way that they can ideally show, they can ideally show that they're doing it, or the government can check to make sure that they're doing it. Unfortunately, sometimes the government inspectors would announce when they were coming, and so they would simply, usher the kids off when they're around, or they would clean up that day. So we have the Factory Act of 1844. Very similar things, except no longer 8 hours a day. Now they have to work 9 hours a day between the ages of 9 and 13. Ages 14 to 18 and women can only work 12 hours a day. There is routine government inspections. Factory owners must clean the factory. That's new. Doctors must check the ages of children, because again, there's that issue of not actually knowing how old these kids are. If they can pass as a 9-year-old, then they can work. But now they're going to have doctors check the ages of children. In deaths, and this one is, I can't believe this wasn't a thing before. Deaths had to be investigated now. So there's that. If someone dies at the job, they have to figure out why it happened to ideally make sure it doesn't happen again. Now, there's more laws, of course. The Mines Act of 1842 says the children, women cannot work underground. The mines is where we saw a lot of children working, and that's actually going to be backbreaking work, quite literally backbreaking work. We have the 10 Hours Act of 1847 that says women and children only work 10 hours. And then, of course, that Factory Act that we started with that does limit the days that children could work. As far as the United States, a lot of times people want to know, in 1904, it was deemed the National Child Labor Board was created, and it said the working conditions are unsafe for workers. They argued that child labor drives down the wages for all workers, which is interesting. It's an interesting argument. Again, more workers, wages go down because there's a bigger pool. And so they start to create laws that ban child labor, and they do set maximum hours of working. So that happens in 1904 when this Child Labor Board is enacted. However, this is interesting, it was struck down and deemed as unconstitutional because the Supreme Court, they did not like the federal child labor laws because it interferes with states' rights to regulate labor. It's interesting because you imagine that, the Supreme Court has different views every few years. But in this case, they said that this it was the states getting involved. And so even today, so individual states did pass laws to limit working conditions in age requirements. Um, and this is why today, at different ages, you can work in different states. Again, it depends on what state you're in. I used to be a kid at one point in life, and I was working at a very young age, bussing tables at a seaside restaurant in New Hampshire, and I could because they had lower working laws than in Massachusetts. So that's our look at child labor laws. We're going to be picking up and talking more about the living conditions that takes place in the cities. So get excited, and I'll see you in a bit.